Thanks for joining us for the technology portion. I'll be just kind of upfront about this one. This will be a long form podcast specifically about technology. We're not putting a time limit on this, so it is what it is. I think some people really enjoy this. Others will probably turn it off pretty quick, and that's okay. But I will tell you this, we're extremely fortunate to have Mr. Schaefer in the role that he's in as our Executive Director of Academic Services. Mr. Schaefer, when I moved up from the AD position, Director of Student Services AD position into the principalship, was actually my first hire as building principal. And I do remember sitting in the interview and Mr. Johnston was in there. And you had turned around for a second to pull some samples out. And Mr. Johnston looked over at me and I went like that. And we said, hey, we're going to take your name to the board if you'd want to come here. And it's been a great addition. Mr. Schaefer's been a great addition for our district. I will say that he left us for a year and got into quasi-administrative position at Collinsville.
Yes, Collinsville.
And you were at the time living in Collinsville. And so when we posted this position, I never called you.
No.
I thought, well, he's closer to home. We'll never see Darren again as far as in a position here. Not that we would never see Darren again because we thought the world of you while we were here, but he put his name in and clearly a great fit for our school district. And we've worked very well together, and I'm going to allude to some of the things we did at the high school that have kind of expanded the district, but we spent a lot of time. I think what Mr. Schaefer's strength is this. He has a unique understanding of technology and use of programs in the classroom to maximize instruction, and there's a lot of layers to this. And I wanted the community today, if you are willing to listen to this entire thing, I get to listen to these conversations a lot about how much thought is going into every teacher, every child, what we're doing, through technology to enhance that experience. We both agree the number one key to great instruction is our teachers. And so when you take that concept, but what can you do to help enhance the skills of the teacher? And that's how we base some of our decisions. And also really trying to understand what a small school district, how it operates differently from a large school district and how instruction can support teachers. So the first thing I tasked him with after you were approved by the board, obviously you were still filling your duties up at Illinois, and you went all the way through that, but I know there were some projects you're working on the side. So one of the things we took a lot of pride in the high school is we had the program. Is it doing what we needed to do? And how efficient can we be? And do we need the program itself? So I handed you the master list of these are all the things we do as far as testing in the district to start streamlining. Do you remember that conversation?
I do, actually. And first thing that popped into my mind was when we utilized USA Test Prep.
Mm-hmm.
We utilized that since I started there in 2013, and it was a great program. But over the course of the years, we've also incorporated other programs like IXL, and you start looking at those two resources and kind of figuring out there's some overlap with those.
Mm-hmm.
So doing an analysis on that and figuring out what could be removed to help streamline our curriculum.
And we never discussed and said it's not a money discussion. It is truly a why is a student doing this in this program and still doing the same thing in the other, and or does it meet the need? But I remember handing that list and you came back pretty quick. You go, what is this stuff? And I said, I don't know. It's elementary stuff. So it really wasn't a bad thing, but going through it, let's talk about, I think maybe the greatest example in the past couple of years. And actually this discussion started to begin to happen before you were on board, really with Mrs. Bosler, Mrs. Watson. So for those of you with students that are maybe a little older in our district, in the old days the kids would do a STAR test. So you had a teacher, they would take a STAR test, they would get the results, and the teacher was responsible for trying to fill the gaps in here. And so you had things like Study Island, and you had these different programs. So you're taking data that may not necessarily align to that third program. It's sort of this triangle effect. The R-VII, explain kind of how that's gone now.
So that's a good example when we used the STAR assessment. So the teacher was responsible for then going into programs like IXL or USA Test Prep and then manually assigning standards to those students where they might be weak in, where they can use some growth in. So iReady's kind of replaced all that. iReady's able to assess the students in reading and their mathematics, and then also create a pathway for them that's personalized for their personal growth.
And I think too, even prior to the iReady, because you came on and iReady had already been piloted at the Telegraph.
And Platten, yes.
Platten didn't have the full program in. They did just the testing for a year.
Yes.
And then, but the long story short is even going back before iReady, things were even being done differently between Platten and Telegraph, and then Telegraph to middle school. Now, some of that's age-based, and you get into more subject-based things, and you get into deeper content in your sciences as you get to middle school, and then obviously deeper is high school. So the programs don't necessarily move all the way K-12, but really K-5, things have been streamlined for our teachers. Suddenly, a first grade teacher and a fifth grade teacher are able to have common, a language to speak of and how to use the program. We're still, I think, I don't want to say on the ground floor. We're still kind of moving through everything iReady can do. I just wanted that example to go to you. I know we're kind of segueing here and it's going to get to a deep discussion, but how efficient can we be with the programs that we have? And it's, again, obviously finances play a role in it, but it's not just about saving every dollar at this point. It's also maximizing what we do for teachers. And I really like the concept of, it's a deeper discussion, but professional development is really geared to school districts with probably like 2,000 kids or more. When you have small groups of teachers, they're having to do less with the common assessments and developing their own tests and working. They can use the computer as the backbone, use the program in the computer. And I'm sounding old school. Use that computer to do that, but then they can also just move them straight into and we're starting to see that really starting to have an effect on moving our kids forward with their scores. It's not perfect, but I think we're in a much more efficient place for our teaching staff instead of them having to figure out, trying to match those standards together. So that's a good thing. Now, I will say this, Mr. Schaefer, and this goes to the second part of that discussion, why we have to continually evaluate the program. And you say, well, I pick iReady. It's a good fit for us now. How long is it a good fit for us? Because there's several things behind the scenes that I've noticed over the years is who owns the company? Are they being bought and sold? And this is not to be critical of USA Test Prep, but USA Test Prep was a backbone for the high school for a long time. Then we began to see it did not carry over to what we were seeing on our test scores. So it was not the program that it once was for us, for whatever reason. I don't know, to be fair to USA Test Prep. I don't even think it's called USA Test Prep anymore. I think it got gobbled up and became something else. It just wasn't a fit for us anymore.
Correct.
So I remember distinctly meeting with a rep. They were trying to look at the different online programs a couple of years ago. And I said, well, I'm looking for a program that can do this, this, and this, and also allow us to have access to see. We want to be able to see every virtual lesson that's being presented, so we know if our parents have a question, we can see what's in there. Acellus has been a great fit for us. They've always been owned by the same group. We can go and look at any lesson. It also meshes well with teachers instructing. I like Acellus as a philosophy of they see the teacher as the number one mover of instruction, but that you could pair Acellus with them and really enhance things, and we've been able to do that in some cases. I'm segueing a little bit. I just remember sitting in there with the rep saying, I'm looking for this, and this, and they pull out a placemat. And they started to say, well, this program would probably be close to here. And I said, what's going on here? What had happened is, and this has been about 8 years ago, what realized is that when schools started to go one-to-one, that these companies started to buy each other up. So no longer did they really own the original concept. The original program was now under the umbrella and I don't think was being supported the way it was intended. I'm just telling you that because that's something we take very seriously. We do an annual review of the program. Is it still moving the kids, and not just, well, we like it, we're comfortable with it. We have to make sure it's meeting the kids' needs. And I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but right now iReady seems to be aligned to our test scores.
It is. And at the end of the day, R-VII is not there to replace a teacher. Nothing will ever replace a fantastic teacher. It's there to supplement the curriculum and supplement instruction.
Yeah, and I'm talking a lot now, and Mr. Schaefer's going to take this over here in a minute, but you and I both got a look at this last year, and for such a long time, we had such a great tech person here, and Mr. Don John, the work he was doing here. But I know towards the end, the pressure I was seeing on Mr. Don John, and then he was able to advance his career and is doing great things, and is still an advocate for our school district whenever we need to call him. But I just saw a lot of pressure. It shifted from this kind of new, exciting platform in 2012, 2013 to, man, how do we not get hacked? And then every time you're adding layers into these, there's this new app, and there's this new program, and I really felt for him. You could just see the stress in him for one person running the program. So when he left, we looked at hiring somebody in to replace it, but some other things started to pop up for us to realize that, and in conversations with other districts, we weren't the first to do this, but in conversations with other districts, particularly those of our size, to outsource the tech program. And there's pluses and pros and cons and pluses and minuses to it. But man, you and I both know the number one thing is to protect the data, the information, the system. I'm going to let you kind of run. Like, it was an interesting process for us, and we really started with that concept.
With your point too of downloading new apps and bringing in new programs for staff and students to use, really everything that you bring in, it's like opening a door for potential threats to happen, and the sense of cybersecurity.
So what we kind of boiled this down to was what's the trade-off here? And we did a huge cost analysis. We did open up an RFP to look at different groups. Our system was very complex, and I don't know that one person it would take them years, I think, to understand what we had here. And that's not a slight at anybody or anything that's been done. It's just the reality of we're no longer using a couple neat programs and make sure you have email and you can use Google Classroom. We have several programs that are sort of this anchor on what you're trying to get done in our minds. And we even sat in a kind of a symposium the other day. A gentleman was just discussing about how that is the mindset that has changed over time. Is now number one is cybersecurity, because everything laying on the line for us. So we got to a point where, like, I think outsourcing makes a lot of sense for us. So it does present new challenges. Ultimately, one of the things that I said, I'm trying to keep this simple. Cybersecurity first, and then I want people to be able to turn their computers on, and the teachers need to be able to work with the kids. And overall, I'm very pleased with the transition. We found some nuances in our system that now we have a better understanding. We didn't know existed. I'm going to let you kind of talk about that, Mr. Schaefer.
Yeah, so K-12 ITC, they came in July 5th and did a whole analysis of our entire district. So they came in, looked at every switch. They got into our system to see what was hosted on our servers. And really, all of this equipment that used to be housed in our tech room here at Danby, it's really no longer there. We're down to one switch. We had a shelf full of switches. Those are all now gone, and they're able to host all of our services. We'll say almost able to host all of our services to the cloud. And some of the challenges that we kind of learned from this was the migration process. So some of the services that we have, for example, with our HVAC system and our telephone systems, our printing systems through Sumner One, those were all housed here. So working with those companies and then working with our technology group to get them to be able to communicate in the sense of technology, some of that was a challenge. And we have learned a lot from that. We kind of, I think, blame everything on the internet. Something goes down, we say, well, the internet's not working. It's not necessarily always the case. It might depend on the programming of those servers or those switches. And just to kind of give you a brief overview of that, you do have our internet service provider, which does connect us to the world. but something has to be done with that information, and that's where our switches come into play. So those switches are kind of like those old school, if you think about the old telephone switches when you would see those on the TV, they have to be programmed on what to do. They have to have rules to follow so that that service knows where to go and what to do. That switch then goes to a server, which essentially, I always thought a server was something programmed, but it's essentially just a computer. So that computer is really no longer here anymore. It's in the cloud, which really just means someone else's computer offsite. So that will control our HVAC systems, our phones, our printers, and then be able to send that information out to all 4 buildings.
So I'm going to stop here for just a second, because another part of this, for those that have had kids here for a couple of years in the district, remember 2 years ago in the spring when we had some weird power surges, and we limped to the end of the year with our technology. It was a rough couple months, but that really stemmed out of that tech room being damaged. We were getting these. We just didn't pick up on it. We now know, but it was tough when teachers couldn't come in and just work. I mean, there was a ton of hours put in just to make that right at the end of the year, to finish the year, get the testing in. We had to delay testing. And then again, last spring, in the middle of this decision process, we had a tornado trying to form over our building, and 2 different times we were up here unplugging all our servers so we didn't have the weird power surges again. That was also part of this too. So the company we have gone with this is very much in the cloud, but they also have 3 data centers in 3 different cities, Kansas City, Denver, and Dallas, that are continually backing our information up. And that I think some of the redundancy in our programs, I understand why the redundancy was there. It was to meet, because we were housing everything to make everything work. We would purchase this. A lot of that expense for our district has gone away. I think conservatively, we felt like $90,000 that we were spending on this annually has gone away and is now under the umbrella. So yes, it looks like a big ticket, but between no longer having that director of technology as one person we're paying, and then the services, we're actually on paper saving money right now. Yes. For the district. But the trade-off is you don't have that one person here in your district that can just run down and help a teacher. Everything goes through a ticket. But then I think for me, and I think you on a much deeper level, has a better understanding of what our system is doing. So the one nuance we found has been a challenge this year. And it has to do with, if you lived in R-VII for a while, you know the internet accessibility wasn't always there. At one point, there was what was called, I'll call it a bridge, in terminologies.
That's the big thing. Some of these terms, like what I might call a router, you call an internet service provider, and they're like, that's not a router, that's called a circuit board. So learning some of the terminology between the various companies as well has been a huge learning moment, yes.
And I'm even more basic than you. That's a computer. Why is it not working? Right. And that does something over there. But so I think years ago, to offset the difficulties of getting internet to Platten in that area, there was what was called, I'll call it a bridge. So basically all the internet from our district comes into what's Danby, what we're sitting in right now.
Correct.
And there's a line run down there. See, down there to Platten. And it turns around and come back.
Yes.
And somewhere along the way, they had what I would call a router.
Same.
And it would organize the information down and back. And if you talk to specifically Ms. Bosler for years, she said, we don't feel like we get the same amount of bandwidth.
That's a great term, yes.
Bandwidth down. I'm doing pretty good.
You are.
Bandwidth down there. Stop laughing, Stevie. She knows I struggle with this stuff. But anyway, the bandwidth that they could possibly have, because this is organizing information all the time. Come to find out, this router was actually housed within another device within a firewall that we no longer use. So when we pulled that out, it just became a mess. And it took us a couple of weeks to even have an idea what was going on. And it's figured out. We had the router in, but times have changed. Financially, it's going to be almost a push to do this. In fact, we may save just a couple $100 a month by doing this move, but we're in the process of getting a direct line into Platten. So kind of take it from there.
Correct. So there's a fee that we pay monthly to have this bridge go from one building to another. So we'll be able to get a direct line of access, direct ISP to Platten, and as Dr. Hogg mentioned, it's only a couple $100 difference.
Yes, and so we're in the process, and the part that gets complicated and why this is a long-form podcast is that there's something called E-rate, and I'm going to talk about E-rate for just a second here. So because the way our system was operating in the past, we were able, there's two categories of E-rate, Category 1, Category 2. We've always been maximizing our Category 1 funds to offset the actual internet service. That's basically like a government, I don't know if it's a grant or whatever it is.
That's what I would equate it to.
Yeah, so they essentially, we write a check for monthly for a bill, and then we get reimbursed. And usually that's done through the internet provider, so there's never like money exchanged back and forth. They just take a chunk off of our bill. So
correct.
Through this process, though, two things. Just to get the line up into Platten, you're having to make all those E-rate adjustments with AT&T. So Mr. Shaver's been working on that. So we've got the temporary solution in there to get our bridge up and get the internet as strong as we can at Platten for the short term, similar to the old system. But at some point, we've been told like 30 to 40 days max. We hope for it to be sooner. We don't promise anything, but at some point there will be just a direct line run in there. So
yes,
you've done a lot of work on the E-rate stuff. Now, going back to our original decision to switch away from having the one person run it and buying our own equipment for the majority of it. We still have to buy Chromebooks and computers, but switches and all the things that I have no clue what's going on in terms I don't even know. And, you know, that's under a different house, but we're going to be able to start expanding and using what's called Category 2 grants or reimbursements that we have not been able to use before because we now have a service.
Correct.
We see an additional 30 to, we're going to say conservatively $30,000 savings if we look at the old formula and just be conservative with it, that will go back into the the technology fees for this. So use a taxpayer, we're going to be able to capitalize more on funds that are out there for our technology services, which in the case of the Ameren plant closure gives us a little bit more wiggle room somewhere, or if things are going really well, we're just maximizing our dollars elsewhere. We're able to spend it more efficiently. Again, kind of back to our philosophy, we don't want to have every bell and whistle with technology. We want to make sure we're good with what we have. So we're trying to maximize those E-rate funds. Do you have anything to add to E-rate other than it's a lot of boxes to check?
Yeah, it's a lot of boxes to check. It's kind of like filling out your W-2 and getting all your taxes done during tax season, but it's going well.
Good. Yeah, again, this is long form and there's a lot more into it, but what else do we need to add here that would benefit the people really into this? We've probably lost a few along the way. That's okay. So let's just go through the programs that we use.
Okay.
The high school, primarily we're using IXL to support math, some science.
So that's a great point that you make. So IXL now has incorporated biology on there too, and social studies. So we have been able to pull that in this year. So we're kind of piloting that at the time. So IXL is still a big curriculum, supports our curriculum at the high school. In addition, at the middle school as well, where we were able to pull the science pieces in with that with social studies. So that's new. We have staff that have been utilizing IXL for years that are actually working with the new staff on bringing that into their classrooms.
So I know a big deal is getting accurate data for what you're doing in the classroom at the high school. And I'm speaking strictly from a high school, all the years I was there, that if a teacher's giving an assessment, they're getting the information back to say, you taught this well, you didn't teach this well. And again, it's not just what the teacher's doing. You may have taught it well, and we always talk to our staff about that. You may have taught it well for 4 hours of the day, and the fifth time you have something that disrupts the class, but you need to go back and hit that 5th hour. So they're that detailed in looking at data. We're using IXL to give us great data there. what other programs we're using for that backbone? Because it used to be USA Test Prep. Again, I don't even think that company exists anymore in that form.
They don't exist, and that's why we brought in IXL. When in the years past, they only really covered reading and math. So they're upping their game and incorporating more pieces to assist our students and our staff.
So Acellus is also used at the high school and at periods and points throughout the district. Acellus is truly that credit recovery part, and we've been using them since 2012, I think. They've been a great partner for us for a long time. So we're not using Acellus for that assessment, state standardized. It is more actual courses that do count as high school credit for credit recovery, and or for some of our college kids, they might be taking some of those courses so they can get their 62 or 42-hour program in. Acellus is for us what you don't, at a large school, you might be able to have enough wiggle room with your staff to place kids in certain areas of need. Here we don't. I mean, we're paying an English teacher. They're teaching English 1, 2, or 3, and then fill in a couple, but it's hard to get beyond that. So there might be some unique courses there a kid wants to take that they can't otherwise. And it's just to enhance what we do at the end of the day. But it is not tied to MAP or ELC or ACT. There's some ACT prep courses in there kids have used over the years. What other programs at the high school? And at the middle school, it starts to, there is a mix. They're still using iReady for assessments.
Correct.
But iReady, where it starts to kind of lose, I think, its strength for us is as the subjects get more specific in their depth.
Yes, and a good example of that is with Algebra 1.
Yeah.
So we do have 8th graders at the middle school here taking Algebra 1 and participating in the Algebra 1 EOC. So iReady really would not be beneficial for those students.
Right.
So we do kind of have a hybrid or a blend of resources to help bridge that gap for those students that are beginning to take high school courses as a middle schooler.
I think that's kind of the long and short of it. You know, I think the last piece here that I'll just kind of mention is the way and we've already rolled this out with our one page, is how we can get better at streamlining, because part of my training with Mr. Rugley and taking over the high school principal job was very simple around, don't always look for the newest and best bell and whistle. Whenever you hit on something that your community trusts how you communicate, keep using that as long as you can. And don't change until you absolutely have to. I found my method at the high school was basically email was a big deal. I was using Twitter to hit kind of another group. And believe me, I would watch. And it got to the point toward the end there for me, before Mr. Rugley took over, that I wasn't hearing much of anything from anyone. So I'd send it out. I'm like, anybody listening? No idea. Usually used to get feedback. But then when we had our sign-up days, like for SLCs, huge sign-up, our back to school, everybody showed up. I mean, the rate at what people attend at Jefferson, when you compare to other districts, is off the charts, our events. So I think Mr. Rugley has kind of found his niche, but that's the thing that we're trying to take as a district-wide. We don't need the latest and greatest. What's the simplest, most effective way to communicate that you trust and you know what you can see? I'm not where we want to be with that yet, but I think we're getting better, if that makes sense, because there are so many platforms, and there's a lot of great resources, but we need to be who we are, and that the parents know they can click on this, and there it is. That's the complicated world that we're getting into. Is there's so many fancy things out there. What can we do to just ensure the trust? Better, consistent, solid communication is just the backbone of the trust with your community. And I'm not where we want to be yet, but I think we're in a better place than we were a year ago. So
I agree.
Thanks for joining us. This guy's fantastic.
Thank you.
But also his ability to connect and work with teaching staff has been appreciated for me by a long time in our high school, but now district-wide. But then we have such great people that are reciprocating that too. It's not just a one-way street there. So thank you for joining us.